When you open a history book, what do you see? Names printed in bold, portraits displayed with reverence, people called heroes, leaders, great figures. But have you ever stopped to ask, who stood behind them? Who were the ones who sacrificed, who quietly helped shape those moments in history, yet were never named? If history were written not only by the victors, but also by the unknown, would the story we think we know still be the same? For hundreds of years, history has often been told in a very familiar way, as the story of central figures, kings on their thrones, leaders standing before crowds, generals commanding the battlefield, thinkers signing their names beneath documents that change the course of the world. They are the ones who appear at the final moment, when victory has already been decided, when the flag has been raised, when the declaration is read before the world, when power officially changes hands. But history does not begin in that moment. It is not born from a speech, nor does it come into existence with a single signature. Before the glow of those moments recorded in books, there is a long road, filled with sweat, tears, fear, and sacrifice. Years of silent preparation, decisions made in darkness, people who stepped into danger without knowing whether they would still exist tomorrow. And along that long road, there are countless people whose names were never written down. They did not stand on a stage before thousands. They did not sign documents meant for future generations. They did not appear in commemorative photographs hanging in museums. And if they did appear at all, they were only faint figures in the background, or faces cut from the frame entirely. They were messengers in the night, moving quietly along empty roads, past checkpoints, through searching beams of light, carrying messages capable of changing the fate of an entire movement. They were the ones printing secret documents in cramped rooms, working beneath weak lamps, fully aware that a single unfamiliar sound, a single small mistake, could cost not only their own lives, but the lives of everyone around them. They were the ones who hid, nurtured, and protected the movement inside their own homes. A kitchen became a meeting room. An attic became a place of refuge. A family meal became a cover for life or death discussions. They lived two lives at once, one ordinary life in front of neighbors, and another filled with risk behind closed doors. They were the ones who accepted suspicion, misunderstanding, and even rejection from those around them. Some were seen as strange, some as dangerous, some as not to be trusted. Some carried secrets for an entire lifetime, unable to explain, unable to defend themselves, because speaking out would mean betrayal, or would put others in danger. And when everything was over, some of them simply disappeared, as if they had never existed at all. History books cannot record all of these people, not because they were unimportant, but because history, to be told more easily, must simplify. It chooses representative names, familiar faces, symbols that can stand in for an entire era. And in that process, thousands, sometimes millions, of ordinary people who were anything but ordinary are pushed to the margins of the story. What is rarely said is this: many of them never wanted to be remembered. They understood that a name could bring honor, but it could also bring danger. If their names were spoken, those who sheltered them, worked beside them, even their families could be placed at risk. So they chose silence. A silence that was deliberate, responsible, and deeply sacrificial. That silence lasted for years, sometimes decades, and when the world finally became safer, they themselves had grown old or were already gone. Time continued to move forward, layers of memory slowly fading, erasing the last remaining traces. And so, history was written again, cleaner, simpler, easier to remember, but also colder, as the people who once stood behind the wheel of history were left with no one left to call their names. It is precisely in this context that, in great historical movements, the people who faced the greatest danger were often not those holding guns on the front lines, but those who carried information. The couriers, the messengers, the carriers of words. They did not fight directly, yet a single small mistake could expose an entire movement, tear it apart, or erase it overnight. They were not allowed to carry papers, not allowed to write anything down, not allowed to keep a single object that could become evidence. Everything, meeting places, passwords, times, routes, identities, had to be stored in their minds. Their memory was the only archive that existed. And if they were captured, there was no chance to correct an error. One confession, whether accidental or forced, was enough to drag dozens, even hundreds of others into danger. Some of them walked the same road every day, at the same hour, with the same appearance. They pretended to be traders, street vendors, laborers, anonymous passers-by, but inside their baskets, inside water carriers, inside sleeves, beneath the false bottoms of containers, were messages written in code, instructions that meant survival, orders capable of changing the direction of an entire historical movement. If discovered, they had no identity to protect them, no rank to bargain with, no organization that would step forward to claim responsibility. On paper, they were just ordinary civilians, and when they disappeared, no one was obligated to search for them or record their names. They were completely alone, facing danger with nothing but silence. There were women who played the roles of homemakers, street vendors, domestic workers in wealthy households or sensitive areas. They observed the smallest details, a careless conversation, an unusual visit, a slight change in daily routines. They listened. They remembered. They connected fragments that seemed meaningless into information of enormous importance. They were the eyes and ears of history, yet in the eyes of society at the time, they were invisible, unnoticed, overlooked. There were even children tasked with carrying messages, because no one believed a child could pose a threat. They ran through narrow alleys, carrying words that sounded innocent. But if they were caught, they were never called heroes. No medals, no memorials. Their names appeared in no books, because history rarely makes room for sacrifices that are too small, too quiet. In science and technology, the truth is no different. Behind every inventor known to the world stand dozens, sometimes hundreds of people who failed repeatedly, corrected errors, and started over. Assistants working through the night beside laboratory tables. Technicians assembling tiny components whose names were never spoken. Test subjects who accepted risk, sometimes trading their health or their lives for an outcome that would ultimately be attached to a single name. When success arrives, history usually chooses the simplest version to tell. A genius, a moment of inspiration, an invention that changed the world. The others fade from the story as if they had never existed, never contributed, never paid the price. And there are cases even more unsettling than that. History truly knows who they were, yet deliberately does not record them. Not out of disregard, but because naming them would mean placing them and their families in danger. And so forgetting, at times, is not injustice, but a final layer of protection, fragile, imperfect, yet necessary, for those who stood behind the wheel of history and accepted disappearance as part of their sacrifice. The most important thing these unnamed people leave behind is not a legacy of names, but a different way of seeing history. History is not the story of a few extraordinary individuals. It is the result of countless small actions repeated again and again, carried out quietly and often in danger. When we understand this, history becomes closer to us, more human, and more real. It also forces us to ask an uncomfortable question. If we only remember those who stand at the top, are we unknowingly forgetting the foundation beneath them? Those without names in the books remind us that a person's value does not lie in whether they are celebrated, but in whether they chose to do the right thing when it mattered. And perhaps the most unexpected realization is this: in our lives today, we are more like them than we think. Not everyone becomes a main character, but every act of kindness, every quiet sacrifice, every right decision made when no one is watching can still become part of the history being written day by day.